Every year, all around the world, our planet goes through some incredibly drastic changes. Mountains shed their leaves and gain caps of ice. Valleys thaw themselves and allow life to return. Entire lakes can appear overnight. Millions of animals travel for hundreds of miles. The shifting of our seasons can create some of the most dramatic stories to ever unfold. With this series, we're going to try and tell these stories and shine a light on both the pedestrian and the highly unusual transformations that occur around us every year. On this first episode, we're going to take a look at spring in the wetlands of Wisconsin. The Lac La Ronde Nature Conservancy is a perfect stage for these stories to play out. Situated on the edge of the Milwaukee River in West Bend, Lac La Ronde is a 137-acre nature reserve with wetland, forest, prairies, and the glacial landscape that shaped most of Wisconsin. The conservancy serves as a refuge to over 300 species of plants, 200 species of birds, and a wide variety of mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. Lac La Ronde was established in 1955 by Lawrence and Anne Morin. At the time, it was a forgotten and abused patch of land with a history of railroad and industrial use. The couple purchased it with the goal of returning it to its natural beauty. They spent 25 years working towards this end, with fantastic results. It had become a sanctuary to the wildlife of the area and one of the most beautiful places around. The Morins donated this land to the West Bend Park and Forestry Department in 1979, with the stipulation that it must be maintained as a nature conservancy. We'll be looking at many of this marsh's inhabitants and how they interact with the warmer weather that returns with April. Like how a certain wetland flower has evolved to flourish here, and how many birds migrate back to these lands as the frosts recede. We'll also look at some of the creatures that hibernate here over the winter. And hopefully, through it all, we'll be able to truly see and understand spring as it affects the wetlands. Winter is a harsh and difficult time in the north. And though it may not seem like it at times, it does eventually come to an end. As spring arrives here in Wisconsin, the frosts of winter tend to linger a bit before giving way to our brighter, greener tomorrow. Most plants can't grow until the snow is completely receded and the soil has fully thawed. But in our marshes and lakes, there are many ways that life carries on. Spring is a time of renewal, a time for nature to expand, rebuild, and flourish, and a time for it to recycle. The natural world is a very efficient machine. Everything is reclaimed with enough time. In fact, throughout the world, and especially here in the wetlands, death is a crucial and ubiquitous part of the process. Here in this stagnant pool of still water, we can see the intersection of life and death. To us humans, it looks like a pure pool of liquid decay, because something deep inside of us knows that drinking it would be lethal. But to the millions of bugs, fungi, and microorganisms that thrive here, there couldn't be anything better. A perfect little cauldron for them to reclaim what other organisms had borrowed. Water like this is also perfect for all kinds of plants that feed off of the rich, recently replenished soil. Plants like this duckweed that forms on top of the water that thaws before much of the ground around it. Some grass is also able to grow through this warmer water early in the season. This here is a flower bud from a weird little plant known as skunk cabbage. It's called that because of the skunk-like odor that its flowers emit when they bloom or are damaged. The plant uses this odor to attract flies and other carrion-feeding pollinators to help it reproduce. It can grow this early in the year because it is a thermogenic plant. That means it can raise its temperature to help melt the frozen soil that would otherwise block its path. It is one of only 6 known plants that are capable of this. Another oddity of this little weirdo is that it grows down instead of up. It has what are known as contractile roots. Every season, its roots pull it deeper into the soil as the stem grows, keeping the flower just at the surface as it burrows further down, eventually becoming almost impossible to remove. But plants aren't the only things that return in the spring. One of the many migratory birds that returns to Wisconsin's wetlands during the spring is the sandhill crane. Despite weighing up to 14 pounds, these greater sandhill cranes can soar for great distances with ease due to their exceptionally large wingspans. Much like hawks and eagles, they make use of thermal updrafts to keep themselves afloat with minimal exertion required. They return to this area every spring to nest around early April. Sandhill cranes mate for life. As they leave the care of their parents at around 1 year old, they form groups of juvenile cranes that will travel together until eventually pairing off anywhere from the ages of 2 to 7. After they pair off, they will start mating, producing a new clutch of eggs every year for the rest of their 20-plus year lifespans. There is very little that distinguishes a male from a female of this species. The easiest way to differentiate a pair is by its size. The female will be smaller. The adults are large enough to defend against most of the predators that they might encounter here. But they are still hunted by a number of large land predators, such as wolves, cougars, and bobcats. The much more vulnerable young are hunted by many smaller predators. Some that hunt the chicks, but many that hunt the eggs. Therefore, the adults rarely leave the nest while brooding. Despite all this, they're not shy. Mating pairs will participate in what is known as unison calling, where they will trumpet out a loud, distinctive melody that echoes hauntingly through the woods around them. The pair here has its nest situated on a narrow strip of marsh between 2 hills at the edge of a lake. The perfect location to raise their young. Their last chick has already left them and they have laid their new clutch of eggs. They now stand guard, rarely allowing their precious young out of their sight. They have everything they need here, and will likely stay here until their new chick is old enough to leave with them. One of the more familiar migrating waterfowls is the Canada goose. With a range that spans through almost the entirety of North America, much of Europe, and parts of Australia, they are one of the most iconic migratory animals in the world. However, they were once a highly threatened species that needed to be brought back from the brink by human intervention. At the start of the 20th century, loss of habitat and overhunting had resulted in severe declines in the population of these now common birds. Today, their numbers have exploded so much that many regions are labeling them as pests for their aggressive behavior and overpopulation. They are an example of both successful conservancy efforts and mismanagement of wild populations at the same time. There are two major factors to the current success of the Canada goose. One is the lack of natural predators. Most of the animals that had previously hunted them are now much less prevalent, especially in the areas that these geese thrive the most. Which leads us to the second reason that they do so well today. Man-made landscapes offer ideal conditions for them to live. Well-maintained lawns, man-made water features, and abundant food from human scraps. It all creates the perfect environment for these animals. This effect is so great that these normally migratory birds have started to show a major shift in behavior. Entire populations will stay in warmer climates all year round, no longer migrating and overpopulating very quickly, causing significant issues for the places in which they take up these permanent residences. With their aggressive behavior towards humans, the toxicity of their waste, and other disruptive behaviors, they've become a major problem for many areas. The USDA has even gone so far as to start controlling wild goose populations. A mere 100 years after they were threatened with possible extinction, their numbers have become so great that we must again intervene, this time to bring them under control. These population control efforts are aimed specifically at non-migratory geese, so as to not disturb the migration patterns of the birds that are behaving normally, and to avoid violating the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. For the most part here in Wisconsin, we only see the migratory individuals. It's too cold for them in the winter, so they head south every year, returning once the snows have melted and the waters have thawed. These are their breeding grounds. They make their nests on whatever bits of raised land they can find near a body of water. After laying their eggs, they usually start a molt that leaves them flightless until their chicks are old enough to fly with them. This could be part of the reason they become so aggressive around anything that approaches their young. Neither of them can fly. Due to the conditions they look for when building a nest, they often run into another common resident of the marsh: beavers. Beavers were also once hunted nearly to extinction. Originally having a population of greater than 200 million, the North American beaver was extirpated from much of its native range and wouldn't be here today without conservancy efforts taken in the mid to late 20th century. They were one of the main causes for early expansion westward in North America, being highly prized for both their pelts and their castoreum, the musk glands they used to coat their fur, for medicines and perfumes. Today, their population has recovered to around 15 million individuals, still a fraction of what it once was. Beavers are what are known as keystone species. Their presence has significant positive effects on the ecology of the area around them. The ponds they create with their dams provides new habitat for many wetland plants and animals. Areas in which beavers were reintroduced saw significant increases in biodiversity and often the return of previously threatened or extirpated species. The main purpose behind their damming of rivers is to create water deep enough in which to build their lodges. These lodges are where they store their food, raise their young, and stay warm through the winter. These wetland bunkers provide them protection from all varieties of would-be threats. The only entry requiring them to dive underwater. This is just one of the many ways that local wildlife survives the deep freeze of the north. Painted turtles survive the icy cold by burying themselves in the mud at the bottom of the ponds they live in. They hibernate through the winter months, slowing their bodily functions to survive until the next spring. As the warmth returns, they emerge from their mud burrows much like a flower greeting the April sun. They spend most of their time in the early spring basking in this sun, their cold-blooded nature making them lethargic until it warms even further. If you look at them, they may seem pretty tough to eat, with their hard outer shells and retractable limbs, but that doesn't stop them from being hunted. Raccoons are capable of prying them from their protective shells, but the real danger comes from those who hunt their eggs. Garter snakes are exceptionally common throughout North America. While completely harmless to humans, they do produce a very mild venom that they use to subdue any live prey they come across. In Wisconsin, we have a couple of different subspecies of garter snake. This one being the plains garter snake. This particular subspecies is said to be one of the most cold-tolerant snakes on Earth, sometimes even exiting hibernation on particularly warm winter days to bask in the sun for a little while. Before they enter hibernation, they will typically go without eating for a couple of weeks to prevent having food rot in their stomachs while they sleep. They exit their communal hibernation dens around early April and will almost immediately start looking to mate. The females will emit a pheromone that attracts all nearby males. This leads to some intense competition and will sometimes result in mating balls of up to 25 competing males swarming a prospective mate. Their diet consists of anything they can get their mouths around, living or dead. That said, they generally prefer one food in particular: amphibians. These wood frogs are currently trying to mate. Common to most of the northern United States and Canada, wood frogs usually spend most of their lives near the pool where they were born. They breed in temporary pools like these so as to avoid the predatory fish and other aquatic animals that exist in permanent lakes and ponds. This means that their young must mature fast enough for them to escape before the pools dry up. To help with this, wood frogs exit hibernation rather early in the year, giving their young time to develop before the heat evaporates their home. They have a particularly high cold tolerance. During the winter, they will freeze completely solid, allowing even their blood to turn to ice. They keep just enough of their organs thawed by producing a number of fluids with lower freezing points that pump through them, just barely keeping them alive. The males will spend the early parts of spring croaking in a chorus, hoping to draw the attention of a potential mate. They rely on the communities they're a part of for a number of reasons, like finding a mate and protecting their eggs by clumping them together. But they're not the only animals that rely on communities in Wisconsin. By this time of the year, white-tailed deer have already finished mating. The females are now getting ready to give birth. They usually birth 1 to 3 fawns sometime in late spring. For the first 4 weeks of their lives, they are unable to stand and remain hidden in vegetation, being nursed only a few times a day to avoid detection from predators. The deer here have also learned to use the hiking trails to be quieter as they move through the forest. This is just one of the many stages upon which these stories play out. Every single day, there are millions of these tales of life and death, played out where no one sees them. But it's all in a delicate balance. Much of what was seen here is the result of significant conservation efforts taken in the past. And many of these plants and animals will likely go away if we don't continue to protect them. Even the seasons themselves are starting to be disturbed. There is no longer a single place on the surface of the earth that isn't affected by our pollution. Microplastics carried in the wind have been found on the most remote mountaintops known to man. And climate change is wreaking havoc across every ecosystem all around the world. Nature is where all of the world's beauty comes from, and we're still throwing it away. This is the only Earth we have, and it's not invincible. We hear about the terrible state of things like this all the time, and yet so few people actually try to do anything about it. We try to push off this responsibility, telling ourselves that we're not so bad, or that the changes we make won't matter. But this is going to take all of us. No one person, or government, or corporation let the world start to die. It's gonna take just as many people to fix this as it did to make things this bad. So now's the time to start. Even if it's a small change, something that doesn't take much, it's time to actually do something. Because if you don't, no one else will. On the next episode of Seeing Seasons, we take a look at summer in the mountains.